You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Athan Hristodulu.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Athan Hristodulu. It is January 19th, 2022, and we are starting off our previews for this weekend's divisional matchups. We got 4 games slated. First one we are starting with, we are talking about here today, and it is going to be the Bengals heading out to Tennessee to take on the number 1 seeded 12-5 Tennessee Titans, coming off their nice bye week, a much needed bye week for this team that has dealt with their fair share of injuries throughout the year, and honestly, probably more on the higher end than most teams, considering the amount of injuries and just the significant injuries that they've been dealing with throughout the entirety of the year. So make sure you hit that like button down below, hit that subscribe button, and let's talk some Bengals at Tennessee Titans. This is probably one of the most exciting playoff matchups of the weekend, in my opinion. You got the young Joe Burrow coming in with his very young offensive unit that has just been able to put points on the board pretty much at will, but was slowed down a little bit just this past weekend, going up against a Tennessee Titans team that I remember saying it at the end of the year is a 12-5 team that for some reason it never really felt like they had that many wins, but they were just killing it all year long despite so many injuries. They had a little bit of a slip up at right after the first quarter of the year, dropping down a handful of losses, taking a tough one to the New York Jets and such, but have just really proven that they are battle tested and that no adversity could really slow this team down. No matter who it was that was going down, somebody was stepping up, replacing them, and doing an excellent job in doing so until the leaders returned. So let's talk about some X factors, players in this game that I think are going to really stand out and make a big difference in this one here. Firstly, for the Bengals, as we normally start with the visiting team, Joe Burrow, of course, a little bit of it's funny because I'm about to say a down game for him considering how well he played this year, but only about, 2.5 and some change for yards last week, couple of touchdowns, no interceptions though, but not quite the game that I feel like a lot of people have been accustomed to seeing him, be able to put up numbers-wise the last few weeks, especially. Then, of course, wide receiver Jamar Chase, the rookie standout who has just been fantastic this year at the wide receiver position. Safety Jesse Bates holding it down in that secondary, the definitive leader of that secondary unit. But one person stands out to me who didn't have a massive impact on last week's game, didn't get a ton of pressure on. He did notch a sack, but he was knocked out with a concussion, and it has got to be Trey Hendrickson. He is going to be an X factor in this game, whether or not he plays. The reason I say that is because without him, that D-line was not the same. And granted, they lost some other injuries, and we'll get into that later, but I think Trey Hendrickson has been an anchor for this pass rush and for the run D as well, but he has just been a stalwart on that defensive line and such a standout player that him being in there or not will factor into how this game plays out, especially defensively for the Bengals and how well they do slowing down the running game, how quickly they're able to get after the quarterback. He is a presence on the field, whether he's producing 5, 6, 7, 8 pressures in a game, or if he's only maybe getting a pressure or 2 but still notching a sack. He is a guy that every single offensive line needs to scheme and game plan for. He had 14 sacks in the year, and again, whether he plays or not will be a huge factor in this game. Now for the Tennessee Titans, there is just no shortage of star power and big names on this team. There's so many good players, and they're all coming back and getting healthy at the right time. A.J. Brown, of course, dealt with a lot of injuries this year, but just a few weeks ago put up 11 catches, 145, and a touchdown just week 18 of the NFL season. He was able to pull in a few catches, a touchdown catch at that. The offense was really starting to click and really getting the ball rolling now that everyone is kind of back and healthy, and they looked really, really good. Another guy I'd like to mention, of course, is Kevin Byard, the safety, the unquestioned leader of that secondary, and honestly, probably like an unsung hero of that secondary at that, and probably even the unquestioned leader of that defense. I feel like Kevin Byard's one of the best, if not in that serious conversation for best 3 safeties in the league. The guy is an excellent ball hawk. He does a great job covering the top for this defense. Derrick Henry is a guy that, of course, that he's coming off the IR, should be massive for this game and a big return for the Tennessee Titans. But in my opinion, a guy that needs to be, not necessarily will be, but more so needs to be an X factor, and I think really needs to step up in this game to help slow down this Cincinnati offense, has got to be their big free agent pickup from this past year, Bud Dupree. He's missed 7 games this year due to injury, which is obviously not a good thing for them, and he has not had quite the year that I think the Tennessee Titans were hoping for due to those injuries, but he's only got 24 pressures total, 3 sacks, 11 tackles, a forced fumble, so he did make do with the time that he was on the field, albeit not as high and aggressive of a statistical spreadsheet that you'd probably hope for with a guy that you shoveled over so much money to bring in. I think he needs to really step up here. This is why you brought a guy in like Bud Dupree. He needs to step up. Big difference maker. I want to see him get a sack. I want to see him pressuring the quarterback multiple times a game. I'm talking 4, 5, 6 times, getting into that backfield and making Ryan Tannehill uncomfortable. Tannehill, I said that weird. Ryan Tannehill, make him uncomfortable, pressure him a bit, maybe stuff a couple of runs here and there if they're going out to the edge. I want to see Bud Dupree step up. I think he should be an X factor in this game. This is exactly why they brought him over from Pittsburgh, and I think that this is the prime opportunity for him to step up, stand out, and make a difference on this defense and really be the anchor along that defensive line. Now, aside from X factors, some things that I'm going to be watching as we go into this game that I think are definitely worth mentioning to you guys. My first one I think is a very obvious question that a lot of people have going into this game, and it has to be, how will the Tennessee Titans offense look with Derrick Henry now back in the fold? Is he going to be on a snap count? Are they going to continue the 50-50 balance that this offense ran through pretty much the entirety of the year? They had a 551 rushing attempts to 535 pass attempts, so they were pretty much right down the middle throughout the entire year as they played their way through. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, curiously enough, when Derrick Henry went down, they actually started to run the football more. I have the numbers written here for you guys so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. In the 8 games that Derrick Henry played, he averaged 117.1 yards a game. This is him specifically, not the entire Titans team. 117.1 yards a game and 4.3 yards per carry and about 27.3 attempts a game. And then the offense itself was averaging about 33 passing attempts per game. Whereas when you look at the other 9 games when Derrick Henry was out and injured and not playing for them, the offense itself had about 135 yards a game, almost 136, 4.2 yards a carry, so the carry goes down about 0.1 per average. Then you have a 32.2 attempts per game. That's 5 extra rushes, and maybe those 5 extra rushes are coming from the other backs as well that were spelling Derrick Henry when he was playing, but it felt like he was carrying the ball every single time and nobody else was really popping up on the spreadsheets for Tennessee when he was running the ball. But curiously enough, they only averaged about 30 passing attempts a game, and that's the key number there. They were actually throwing, while not a lot, still a little bit less than when Derrick Henry was toting the rock for them. So are they going to follow that 50-50 split? Is he going to be on that snap count? Do you think he's just going to jump right back into the fold and get going again, take off, and just it'll look like nothing ever changed? Or maybe, does he show some rust? I'm really curious to see how much of a workload he gets in this game and how much they try to protect him, at least through this first week, just to see how he is before they, if they ultimately win and move on to the next round, and maybe they really start to unleash Derrick Henry coming into the championship game if they make it there and whoever they end up playing against. My second key point and thing that I'll keep an eye on in this game, because I think this is a really interesting one as well, is if this Tennessee pass defense can fend off Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Boyd, Higgins, Mixon, all these guys. Are they going to be able to stop the Cincinnati Bengals through the air? The Tennessee Titans were averaging about 245.2 yards per game. That's actually 25th worst in the league, so they're pretty low there. However, despite that, they're in the top 10 for interceptions through the year. They had 16. They had 83 passes defensed on the year, tied for 4th in the league. So while they maybe weren't the best in terms of yards per game, they were still getting in there, breaking up passes, intercepting the ball. Kevin Byard, I believe, had 5 or 6 on his own. We mentioned him earlier. So they are able to turn the ball over. They're able to break up those plays. It's just a matter of how many of those plays are they going to break up, and how are the Bengals going to game plan around what is, again, a little bit more of a lax pass D in terms of yards a game, but is more aggressive at going after the football. It is important to keep in mind one thing that I'm looking at coming out of that Raiders game. And again, this is for the Bengals specifically, slightly pedestrian numbers. Burrow had 244 yards and 2 touchdowns, not quite the not quite the average that he had been pushing his way through the entire year of. We've seen him throw 4 touchdowns and like 400 and some odd yards multiple times this year. So the Bengals are coming off a little bit of a down game, and maybe the Tennessee Titans look at what the Raiders did to try to slow that offense a little bit. Now, my third and final thing that I'll be really keeping an eye on here, and I think that this one is maybe a little bit more of a low-key point that some people might not be thinking too much because of the lack of production they've had at the wide receiver position this year because of injuries and what have you. Can the Bengals contain the tandem of Julio Jones and A.J. Brown? Why am I asking this? Well, it's no secret. Since he struggles to defend the ball over the middle through the passing game, they allowed 310 yards to Derrick Carr through the duration of that game. On top of that, they have a depleted D-line that, they've lost 3 people, or not they've lost, they did lose 3 people in that game against the Las Vegas Raiders. Is it Larry Ogunjobi? I feel like I'm forgetting what his name is. I feel like his name's Larry. I don't know if I just made that up or not, but Ogunjobi's going to be out. He's put on the IR for that game. Of course, Hendrickson went down with the concussion. Daniels is also dealing with an injury as well. Mike Daniels, the D tackle. Whether or not they end up playing in that game, that it remains to be seen. But I mean, your pass defense has already kind of struggled. You're going to be down at least 1 lineman, potentially 2 or 3, depending on how serious these injuries are that they sustained against Las Vegas. You have to wonder, can they keep up? I know a lot of people coming in this game are thinking, how's Derrick Henry going to play? How much are they going to run the football? How many yards is Derrick Henry going to have? How many touchdowns is he going to score? But I'm sitting here asking, can the Bengals apply enough pressure to slow down Tennessee and the air attack that they have there that literally just came off of 4 touchdowns in Week 18 against a Houston Texans team that could not pressure Ryan Tannehill? And again, I get it. It's the Houston Texans. It's not comparable, but they're not necessarily the best in pass coverage already, especially over the middle. I think the linebackers let up about 136 yards altogether over the middle to Derek Carr this past week. And on top of that, couple that with the inability to rush the passer, if they're going to, hypothetically speaking, if they're missing Ogunjobi, Hendrickson, and on top of that, Daniels, that is a depleted D-line. You're going to have guys playing snaps that otherwise probably would have only seen a few snaps in the game at most, like 3, 4, 5, because they're rotational guys. That's definitely going to hurt. And I'm curious to see if the Bengals are going to be able to slow down that air attack and maybe shut things down for Jones and Brown. I think the DBs have a tall task coming up against them, against a very good, experienced wide receiver, and also a very... At this point, I mean, he's emerged, injuries aside. A.J. Brown is a fantastic wide receiver, and I even claimed him a top 5 wide receiver coming into the season. I think when healthy, he can be. But again, you got a tall order coming your way and a D-line that's hurting. I don't know how well this is going to fare. And that kind of brings me into my next point where we talk about disadvantages for both of these teams. The Bengals, accidentally, because it was not supposed to get that in depth, and I was supposed to save it for this category here in the conversation, but big disadvantages for each team. The big one that I have here is, of course, the Bengals D-line. I just kind of flew off into a tangent about it, so I'm not going to go too much into it here, but I am really concerned about that D-line, especially if all 3 of these players do end up missing the game. You're already for sure down 1 guy. Can they bring the pressure? Can they stop the run? I feel like the run game really opened up when they started dropping like flies over there in Cincinnati, or for the Cincinnati Bengals, as they kept going down throughout the duration of the game. It felt like the Raiders offense was able to catch a little bit of steam because there was just such a lack of pressure and lanes were starting to open up for them. I am really concerned for Cincinnati. On the flip side, for the Tennessee Titans, and I think this really speaks volumes for just how good the team actually is, I'm more concerned about their discipline than anything else. And what I mean by that is when you look at the numbers, they are tied for 29th in the league in defensive penalties at 118, and they're right in the middle of the pack at tied for 15th with 103 offensive penalties. We saw what happened in Dallas. Whether you're a Dallas fan or not, or if you're just a viewer that watched the game, there was so many penalties called, and do not blame the refs. The Cowboys were one of the most undisciplined teams in the league in both offensive and defensive side of the ball. They were committing penalties left and right all game. I think the final total for them was like 14 penalties. Dak Prescott tried to slight the referees for calling all of them, but I mean, hey, dude, rein your team in and get it together. You can't be, line yourselves up correctly. False starting at home. Like, what is going on here? Like, let's be real. Rein in your team. Be disciplined. Can they avoid the mistakes of shooting themselves in the foot and giving a Bengals team yardage that they have no trouble accumulating on their own already? That's probably my biggest concern for this Titan teams. It's not positional things. It's not, can they defend the run? Can they defend the pass? Because they've proven that they can do a lot of that even with players out. I am just concerned about the penalties, and I'm curious to see how much of a factor that plays in for the Tennessee Titans coming into this game. Now, for what everyone's always here for, betting odds, my thoughts on them, the over-unders, the spread, who I think is going to win the game and by how much. For the spread, we have the Titans at -3.5, Bengals at +3.5. I really like the Titans at -3.5, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a second here. That seems like a pretty short bet for decision-making on this one. I could see if the Tennessee Titans end up winning, it's probably by about 7 or so. I would say a touchdown, maybe like, a touchdown late in the game to go up 4 or something like that, and I could see them stealing a win that way. Bengals +3.5 to lose, like either one of these feels really good in my opinion. As for the over-under at 47, and keep in mind, this is going up on a Wednesday for you guys. The actual odds for the game could definitely shift come Saturday, but the over-under currently sitting at 47 is definitely something I could see pushing the over because both of these defenses have let up a handful of points in some big games, and I think that there's a possibility that this game kind of turns into a shootout depending on how things are going for both of these offenses. I could see it becoming one of those games, so I definitely like the over at 47. And as for my winner, and you'll see kind of how much I'll double down on this one here, for my winner in this game and who I think comes out on top, I'll tell you right now, I really want the Cincinnati Bengals to win this game, but I'm going with the Tennessee Titans at a scoreline of 31-24. Like I said, I think I can see these teams putting up some points. I think that it becomes more of an offensive standoff than anything else. But I do think that the over is definitely possible. I have totaled out here 55 points for that final score. So I definitely think the over is a good one here. Tennessee winning by 7 definitely could be something I see as well. But I like the Titans. They're at home. And honestly, the biggest concern for me really going into this game, not even the pass D for the Bengals, but just that defensive line as a whole was kind of ravaged in that game. And even if Trey Hendrickson and Mike Daniels are playing the game, and I'm curious to see if Trey Hendrickson's allowed to play just a week after suffering a concussion. I don't know how that's going to go and if he's going to be able to clear protocols in time. But if Mike Daniels is slowed down from the groin injury, he can't fire off his legs or maybe move his hips as quickly in the game. I am really concerned for the D-line, just, for depth things, for the ability to get after the quarterback and stuff the run, things like that. I am a little bit concerned. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I appreciate you all for watching. I'm excited for this divisional round weekend. I hope you guys are as well, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a good one.